mountain, wildflowers bind the ground, down by the Russian river.
Welcome to our Pride Perspective radio show. I'm Cece Pinero. My pronouns are she, her. Our Pride Perspective radio show is here on KSQD every other Sunday from 5 to 6. Find the recordings and updates on the Santa Cruz Pride website, santacruzpride.org. Our show is guided by the following beliefs. But before I tell you that, this show is going to focus on the Dyke March and reflecting on our year. This is part one of reflecting on our year and focusing on the Dyke March this time around. And you've all been listening to our show since January, and we've gone through the history of our Santa Cruz Pride throughout the years. And our following beliefs are: we believe that Santa Cruz County is thriving partly because of the contributions of LGBTQ plus people, and LGBTQ plus people in Santa Cruz County are thriving because of the broader Santa Cruz County. And that's not true everywhere. We're very fortunate here. We believe in the words of Jewish poet Emma Lazarus that none of us are free until all of us are free. On this show, you will hear us refer to queer history and LGBTQ plus history. For us, these terms are interchangeable and refer to people who identify as lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, anywhere on the gender identity spectrum, and who they are attracted to. All are welcome to be part of this radio show. Our past 3 shows in November focused on religion and LGBTQ plus people. Our shows included conversations with local clergy people, including Dave Patee, Simon Dingleson, Eli Cohen, and Deb Johnson. We then talked about religion from the layperson's perspective, which led to a conversation with Kim Clark, who was one of the producers of the film God and Gays, Bridging the Gap, that was released in 2008, and with Peg Shamira Hedman, who helps coordinate the Out in Our Faith organization across Santa Cruz County. Those recordings can be found on our website at santacruzpride.org or on the K-Squid website. There's a link to that film as well that is still inspirational to watch today. And Kim Clark will be our host next time we meet here, which was going to be on the 28th of December. Both Rob and I will be out of town, and we are really fortunate to have our stand-in host of Kim Clark. So we really appreciate her being willing to do that. So for our show today, reflecting on our shows for this past year, we began our show sharing about the vibrant LGBTQ plus history and people across Santa Cruz County. For this show, we're going to focus on the first part of the year from January to June, and then our final show will highlight segments from our show from July to November. Rob is out tonight, and our guest here today is Mariposa Bernstein, who's been an important part of Santa Cruz LGBTQ plus history. Welcome, Mariposa.
Thank you, Cece.
And happy Hanukkah.
Thank you. I know you focused on religion, and even though I'm Jewish, I also identify as pagan, and tonight is the first night of Hanukkah. And I woke up this morning to some news that was very challenging because, of course, Australia's a day ahead of us, and there was a terrible shooting on the beach when people were celebrating Hanukkah. With over 11 people killed and many more injured. And the person who did it was, one of them was caught, but one of them was actually stopped by a Muslim man who jumped in to protect and was shot, but he's okay. And it's a terrible situation, but also shows that people are human and kind and will risk their lives for strangers no matter what the situation. So I hold that light in my heart, and we'll be saying the Mornis Kaddish, the prayer for the dead, for these folks from now on. And we still want to bring the light of Hanukkah and the miracle for peace in the world.
Well said. Thanks so much. And that really does remind us of our motto, which, is none of us are free till all of us are free. And it is very, very heartening to hear that no matter if somebody came forward, it just happened to be a Muslim man who was there, and it doesn't matter when there is, terror or terrorizing and violence, that in our hearts we are all, together in unity, and love is, the answer, and that we can, move forward. And if you see something, like they say, see something, say something, do something. Mm-hmm. That's really a great, first night of Hanukkah gift, that there is a miracle in the devastation. And we certainly send our great healing thoughts and wishes and vibes go out to Australia. Anyway, so Mariposa, thank you so much for that. Can you start by introducing yourself and how you ended up in Santa Cruz?
Well, I was born Marilyn Bernstein in Boston, and while I was traveling many years ago in Europe, I was studying abroad. I made a friend who lived in California, and she moved to Santa Cruz in 1981. So I decided to come for what I joke as a 3-hour visit. It was supposed to be a 3-day visit that lasted that first time here for 3 months, and I got involved with people to protest the nuclear power plant at Diablo Canyon, and that was in 1981. Many of the people I'm still friends with, and we all got arrested. And one of the things that we decided to do was take a name of an animal that was getting disrupted by the beginning of the turbines, and I was like, I'm not going to call myself Butterfly, but I love butterflies, and I didn't even know they hibernated here. And someone said, well, you should call yourself Mariposa, and it's very close to Maryland. And I was like, okay, what's that mean? Because I had studied French, so if they had told me papillon, I would have known. So I took the name Mariposa. It turns out it's also the name of what was the women's shelter in Watsonville, and I did shelter work back in Boston, where I moved from. And I fell in love with Santa Cruz and went back and got my stuff, because, like I said, I was just here for a short visit, and moved back officially in '82, and haven't left California since. I mean, I've left.
Now, when you're protesting at Diablo Canyon, did you all get arrested and go into like these dorms? And
yeah,
and there was definitely many other people I know were there, mm-hmm. and the women were separated from the men.
Correct.
Right. And you played guitar and sang, and
yeah.
People.
Well, I didn't play guitar, but people
other people
did. Yeah.
played
Mm-hmm.
guitars and sang, and you were in like a sort of gymnasium. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Well, it was a pretty awesome time. We were there when Starhawk, who was raised Jewish, but is I call her a green witch. I identify as a green witch as well, someone who is close to nature and in herbs and medicine and farming and so forth. And she led a big ritual, a spiral dance, in the courtyard of the place where we were being held at La Cuesta College, I believe. And we just danced around and sang to the moon and just slept on little mats that they gave us. And I was there with Paula, who's now Rabbi Paula, it was part of Out in Our Faith. And she wasn't a rabbi yet. And yeah, it was just an amazing time. We shared stories, and several of us got arrested different times later, and we did rituals within the jail and sang, and
then they let you all out.
Yeah, well, we did our 3 days there. That's where I did my 3-hour tour, 3 days. And I didn't even get to be arraigned as Mariposa, because we decided to all be called Karen Silkwood, which some of you might remember the story with Meryl Streep and Cher. And so she was a whistleblower. And so the first couple of people got called up from the judge, and at first he didn't get it, that it was a political thing. And he's like, how many Karen Silkwoods are out there? And like 300 of us raised our hand. And it was actually Paula Marcus who came to represent us and sang Holly Near's song, It Could Have Been Me, and sang the verse about Karen Silkwood. to the judge. And then he's like, well, you all get time served, so just go, kind of thing.
That's so great. Now, for the young people that are listening, or for other people that might have forgotten, you just tell a little brief story about Karen Silkwood and who she was, and
Karen
what whistleblowing she did.
Yeah, she worked for, I believe it was called Kira McGee. It was a place that worked with nuclear stuff, and she wound up finding out that some of the products were faulty and they could cause a lot of problems, and so she was bringing blueprints to meet with the press and the police and everything, and her car got sideswiped and she was killed. And in the movie, it's kind of relevant too. Cher was her roommate, and Cher played a lesbian.
Very
hairdresser.
good. We love that.
Yes.
And I don't even know if I remember what was the name of the movie. Was it called Karen Silkwood?
It was called Silkwood.
It was called Silkwood. Right.
Yes.
Silkwood.
I highly recommend it.
Yes, absolutely. I love Cher playing a lesbian.
Yes.
Can't beat that.
Right.
So can you share a little about where you grew up?
Yeah, I grew up outside of Boston in just a little town that was, pretty close to Boston, and moved to Rhode Island to go to college, and then moved out here, and then went back there, and then pretty much lived between Boston, Rhode Island, and here my whole life. We're just talking about that I've been here more than half my life now, so it's kind of a weird thing.
So maybe we'll call you a real Santa Cruzian, maybe.
Second
It's close.
generation.
There you go.
Because you're a real one.
Yeah, so what was school like for you as a kid?
Well, I didn't identify as, I didn't even really know about gay or anything like that, but I was in the theater department. So I had a lot of what I now know as gay male friends, and several of them, when I stayed connected during the reunions, had passed of AIDS when, in the 80s when I went back to visit. So because I was in the theater community, I was, pretty, it was pretty open. And the Jewish community also was pretty open. I was part of a Jewish youth group, and we'd go camping and things like that, and, do events. And like I said, I did theater. And I wasn't very religious, but, I went to temple. I was bas mitzvahed. And so I feel like I'm more of a practicing Jew in terms of culture and connection, and Jewish people in this country anyway, even though there's problems too with every group, have generally been on the forefront of civil rights organizations. And I started doing that kind of work, when I was young. My mom would send me out to raise money for the Heart Fund and the Cancer Fund, and the neighbors would see me coming. I'd have a little envelope, and they'd give me $1, except for one neighbor across the street who would close her shade. And then I got involved in anti-war stuff when I was in high school, anti-Vietnam War. And then I started getting involved with boycotting Nestle's, which is still a company that I absolutely despise. And it upsets me that some of my favorite herb companies and water and stuff are owned by Nestle's, and they're a horrible company, and people need to boycott them.
Absolutely. You mentioned culturally Jewish, the differentiation between culturally Jewish and the religious Jewish. And certainly for our listeners, Judaism and Jewish people, it's the only group that has been sort of misrepresented as if you're Jewish, it means you're religious Jewish and not culturally. So there's a culture and a religion that has been combined. And can you speak a little bit to that, and what's that like for you? And has that been an issue, or how do we, talk about it and explain to people, the difference?
I thought we were talking about the Dyke March, but okay.
We will. We'll get there.
We'll get there. It's fine. I used to do improv, so let's see what I can say about that. I guess, like I said, I was bat mitzvahed, and, I went to temple, and my family kept kosher, which is a special way of eating that's long and complicated, though they kind of cheated, and we'd go out for Chinese food and eat it out of the house. But when I think of it culturally is more the passing of the values, which I think is probably true in many different groups, but because it's been a written language for so many years, well, Hebrew was, things have been passed down, but, the values that, like I said, most religions have of, being kind to your parents and your neighbors and taking care of your children and, not hurting people and, those kind of things, making sure that people are educated and fed and housed. Those are kind of the values that have driven my life and my work. I'm an acupuncturist, or some of you don't know, but I'm an acupuncturist, and I have always provided health care for low-income people and worked at the acupuncture school, where we also have clinics for veterans. And we probably had more training than most acupuncture schools around the LGBTQ issues because of my working there and encouraging workshops on things like that. And we had some of the first HIV patients, and I worked a lot with Gary Reynolds, who is was one of the people that educated us about HIV back in 1990, something like that, 89, 90. So I think that's how I, feel that I'm culturally Jewish. I also like to celebrate the parts of the holiday, that I don't necessarily always go to temple and do all the prayers, but I like to acknowledge the change in seasons and the lights of Hanukkah and the food and things like that. My mom was a caterer and my wife's a chef. And so...
Yes, the food.
The food, the songs aren't so great for Hanukkah compared to Christmas, so we have to make up for it with jelly donuts and latkes.
Latkes.
Yeah.
Yes. So you mentioned you're an acupuncturist, which sort of leads to my next question was, what other schools have you attended after high school? So obviously acupuncture school, but what other education did you do?
Well, I started doing theater at Roger Williams College in Bristol, Rhode Island. When my third semester was a semester abroad in London, England, and I went over there, and it was 1977. It was a year after they had had a drought, and it rained every day. And I kept thinking, how could a country that is so imperialist not know how to heat? And it was like, it was cold and damp the whole time. I got really depressed, and I made a friend there, and he said, why don't you try acupuncture? And I was like, well, I don't really know about that, but isn't it for like back pain, which people still think it's only for that? And he said, oh, it can be for anything. And I went and saw this acupuncturist, and she changed my life. I just felt so different emotionally afterwards. And so I got back to Boston after my travels and found out the first acupuncture school was in New England. So I thought, okay, well, I'll do my prerequisites and go there. But then I came out to visit, finish school at UMass Boston with my BA in psychology and women's studies. I was starting to become a budding feminist, and I also helped blow open a huge sexual harassment lawsuit, which could take up a whole nother section of the show. And so I came out to visit a friend that I'd met while traveling in England, and she had just moved here from LA. And so I found out the acupuncture schools were good out here, and so I went home and then came back and found out 5 branches started here in 1984. And so I didn't even go to San Francisco to go to school, but I later went and worked in San Francisco off and on for 6 years. Like once a week I'd go up there and stay overnight and worked at an HIV clinic.
So that was meant to be that 5 branches opened here and you wanted to go to acupuncture school. That's something.
I know.
I think we're coming up to a break here.
Okay.
And after the break, we will get to the Santa Cruz Dyke March. And we have talked about it before, but we will talk about it again because Mariposa was certainly one of the main dykes. That founded it. And now it's called Dyke Trans March. We're back live, and I think we're going to go ahead and play a clip from the Dyke March. Keep me on task here to get to the Dyke March because I'm having so much fun just talking to Mariposa. But we're going to have a clip from the Dyke March from this the Dyke Trans March, because it will be from our last Dyke Trans March, and many of you were there, so have a big listen of our last Dyke Trans March.
Did the rest of you kind of join into this? Were any of you at that first gathering, or if that was in 93, what brought the rest of you into it, and how do you keep it going today?
I was at that march in 93. I remember seeing you, Mariposa, in the street. That was wonderful.
I figured you were there.
Yeah. And I did swallow a little bit of fire. But it was that high from that Dyke March that I brought back to Santa Cruz. That was fundamental.
Yeah. I got to say, Gabe always was bringing it.
Well, you were just hearing from Venus. That was Venus's voice that we heard earlier, but our audio is not that good. And we have Mariposa live here in the studio, so we might as well talk to her since she started the Dyke Trans March. And I am remiss at not asking about this before, but so Mariposa, I understand you were involved in the first Dyke March in Santa Cruz that began in 1994. 1993. Can you share how that started and sort of some details about that?
Well, as many of you know, there was a huge contingent of queers from Santa Cruz that went to the National March on Washington in 1993. Some of us had actually gone in 87. Rabbi Eli, who wasn't a rabbi at that time, was also there. And that was where there was the first Dyke March. And it was organized by, I think, a contingent in New York that were also called themselves the Lesbian Avengers, and they swallowed fire. And it was an impromptu march. I mean, people knew about it, but they didn't get permits or anything. And it was the night before the big march, so people were busy, setting up things, and the quilt was getting unveiled the next day and so forth on the Capitol Mall. And they just started, I'm not sure, I can't remember where we marched from, but I used to sell buttons, so I actually had a button board on, and I was up on a little pedestal of, fire thingy where I could just see everything going. And I wish I had a cell phone back then or a camera, but I just saw thousands and thousands of women just marching down the street and chanting, and the men were on the sides or on the back to just offer support. And it was called the Dyke March because we didn't really have the politics of trans, that much in that at that time period. I mean, it wasn't a political movement.
Were there any radical fairies at the first Dyke March? Because I
they
know
were on the side.
Okay, because
yeah,
I know they came
side.
and marched with us soon after that. I don't remember what years, but I remember marching in the Dyke March, and they marched with us. But it was probably more like 98 or something.
Yeah. For the most part, for many years, it was considered like, let's just have it be, dykes and by women, and then things progressed. So, but that was back in Washington, and it blew my mind. So that was in April, and that whole trip was an amazing experience. And so I came back here, and Herland was still happening. And if people don't know it, there's a little new history poster at the Museum of Art and History that includes Herland and the work that Kayla Rose helped to get started. It's in the room next to the queer exhibit as well.
That would be great to have Kayla on. Are you still in contact with her?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
We got to get Kayla on the show and talk about her land. Love her land.
Yes, it was a wonderful time. So Laurel was working at her land, and I don't know Laurel's last name, and I apologize that I still haven't been able to find her. But she was a beautiful Amazon with long, curly red hair, and we just started talking probably over chai, and I said, I want to do a Dyke March here. And she said, yeah, let's do it. So we said, let's just do it on Pink Saturday because it's the night before the Santa Cruz Pride, and we don't need a permit. We're just going to gather at the town clock, and just whoever shows up. And people read poetry, and it was very peaceful, and we just marched. I can't even remember how many women were there. And the men, like I said, just were on the side or in the back, just kind of offering support. And we did it that way for several years, very, very intentionally not getting permits, and, having it be just, this is our streets, we're taking back our streets, we're moving, we're being peaceful, we're exercising our democracy. And we would go, down Pacific Ave during, business time. And then years later, there started to be a trans march in San Francisco on Friday nights, and then the Dyke March on Saturday, and then Pink Saturday, and then Pride. And it became apparent that it wasn't really feasible to do that long-term in Santa Cruz because it was very vulnerable. There weren't enough trans people at that time, to really sustain a march. And so and then by then, Venus and Melissa Bernstein and Val Corral had taken over, the organizing and the doing the shows and the music, and so it became much more inclusive.
Well, and I love that you're mentioning all these names now. Valerie Corral, the founder of WHAM, Women's Alliance for Medical Marijuana, and Melissa Bernstein. And everybody thinks you're related, but you're not.
No. Well, we pretend to be sometimes.
There you go. Sisters in unity or something.
Yes, absolutely.
Right. So those. I'm making notes of this because we got to get Val in here on this show, and we've got to get and we're going to have to get Melissa and Venus also as well. Yes.
Oh, yes.
Absolutely.
And they actually, getting current, passed the proverbial baton this year at the 2025 Dyke Trans March. And I don't know the names of the people that they passed it on to. I saw them that night, but I don't remember.
Wow.
But there were, younger people, some who were trans, and
because you all been doing it so long. How many years before the baton was passed? What was that?
Well, I don't know, I can't remember when they kind of came in, but over 20 years they were doing it, 25 years probably. So it was very exciting, and they've created more shows, and more like it's a whole thing. You're there for several hours. People sell T-shirts, that kind of thing. And it's still very creative and wonderful. And I love during COVID, people were very protective, and they rode bicycles and things like that. So that was fun to still make sure the community stayed connected. And we see more wild burlesque, as well as lots of young people speaking spoken word and performing, and it's really become quite the event. So I'm really glad that there are folks that are taking it on, and that there's still those of us around that can still mentor.
Yes, absolutely. It's so important. Mentorship is very important. And I love the Dyke Trans March because we've always done it without permits or permission. Because, women are just taking back the streets. And Santa Cruz has been such an open and welcoming place, again, that our community, understood that and allowed that to happen. And it's been peaceful the whole time. Thank you so much, Mariposa.
Yeah.
We have a clip from Rob, and we're going to just tune into that.
And as I reflect back on our Pride Perspective radio shows, it's pretty amazing that we've done 24 shows, and we will have done 26 by the end of December. This started out as a reason to celebrate the 50th anniversary of Santa Cruz Pride, but has grown into really celebrating the LGBTQ plus history across Santa Cruz County and all the individuals who continue today to make an impact on our local economy, our local politics, our local inclusivity across our county, and to celebrate all that we are. There are a couple segments of our past shows that I wanted to highlight. The first show that I wanted to highlight was our very first one, and we had Daniel Dickmeyer and David Payne, two of the people who originated and helped put on the very first Santa Cruz Pride. Here's a little bit of what they said.
Well, I'll start. This is David. It was a heady time. It was, the early 70s, and we were very young. I was only 21. I was in my last year at UC Santa Cruz. A lot of us were involved in other social justice movements like the anti-Vietnam War movement, women's movement. And it seemed like, kind of a perfect alignment of forces. Even though Santa Cruz at the time was pretty conservative, especially compared to now. The county was half the size it is now, and UCSC itself was in its first decade and only had 5,000 students compared to 20,000 now. But it was very conservative. But, young people are kind of bold, and we don't think about consequences very much. And it actually started out of Cabrillo College. Maybe I'll have Daniel talk a little bit about that.
Great.
Oh, yeah, here I am. Well, it was a kind of a strange time for me because I hadn't lived in Santa Cruz that long, and I didn't really know any gay people, very few. And somehow we just decided, because David and I were together then, and we had a couple of good friends who really wanted to start an organization. So it just kind of took place. And then somehow, amazingly, we heard about Cabrillo College, and there was one woman who worked in one of the departments. I forget what her department was. She worked with the health department.
Billy Paul was her name.
Yeah, but the young woman.
Oh, yeah.
What's her name?
I can't recall her name.
Anyway, she came to. We decided to have a meeting, and I don't quite know how we got the word out, but we did meet at Cabrillo College in the main meeting room, and everything just kind of. There were some couples, and there were some, non-couples, and some people who were just curious. It was a pretty good breakdown of women and men, actually, for that first meeting. And so all of a sudden we decided, and of course, I had never been to a Pride March, or I guess San Francisco had been having those, but I'd never been to any organizational meeting like that. And we kind of elected not an official, president or whatever. We were just kind of we were very into collectives. That's what the word was, and we're a collective. So we're all supposed to work together and not discriminate. And so somehow, pretty soon, I forget what month it was, but we decided we should go for a Pride event. But
we thank Dan and David and many others who decided to gather and to put on that first Pride event in Santa Cruz. That planning started in 1974, and then the first Pride events took place June 16th to 22nd, 1975. That included workshops and a concert by Lou Harrison, and that culminated with a Pride picnic in San Lorenzo Park on Sunday, June 22nd. This was the first time queer people came out in such a public way in Santa Cruz, and the queer culture overall has been an integral part of Santa Cruz County ever since. Prior to 1975 and 1974, the Women's Health Collective was founded by Cater Pollock and others, and still continues today. Here is Cater talking about the beginning of the Women's Health Collective.
Yeah, absolutely. I was a really big part of that. Let's see, I started out right when I first arrived. I started working with two other women to offer a hotline of information, and we were offered to let people call in and ask us about any of women's health issues, especially STDs and birth control methods. pregnancy screening and abortion. And this was really revolutionary at the time because, again, there was no internet. There weren't even self-help books. There was just, starting from the Our Bodies, Ourselves collective. There were some newsprint flyers on these issues. And so we posted mimeograph flyers around town with our individual home phone numbers, landlines, obviously. And gradually, over the year, the group grew, and by fall, there were maybe over a dozen of us, young women. We were pretty much all in our 20s, and we came up with this, brainstorm idea that we wanted to open our own clinic. Okay, we had no credibility in town, but this is what we were going to do. And I was really instrumental in driving this. Within less than a year, we opened our clinic, and we, had offered abortion services and GYN services. We trained ourselves. I mean, it was an incredible effort and very, very exciting because we really wanted to be able to provide health care for women.
The Women's Health Collective is just one example of a service that developed because of the developing lesbian culture across Santa Cruz County. We are thankful to the many women who started the Women's Health Collective in 1974, and that these services continue today in Santa Cruz 50 years later for people of all genders. The late 1970s caused various men's groups to develop as well. The men's group met weekly at London Nelson Center, where men would gather and talk about men's issues. From that, the Gay Men's Volleyball Group developed that took place at Cowles Beach in front of the Dream Inn. Here you can hear John Laird talking about how gay men's volleyball began, and Patrick Meyer reflecting on the importance of gay men's volleyball in those early days.
John, I understand that you started the Gay Men's Volleyball in 1979. How and why did that start?
It was Ken Smith and I think it was, now it's been so long, we put up leaflets, we announced it at the men's group. It morphed into every Wednesday on the beach from the first Wednesday after the time change to the Wednesday before. And it was just this great social thing. Everybody looked forward to it, and it was as much social as it was volleyball, and we would all go out to eat afterwards, and it just became this wonderful social thing. I think it was exactly as we were saying earlier, it was things that people were hungry for.
Yeah. And later in my career, when I went to graduate school and then came back to Santa Cruz as a psychotherapist, I often would recommend, because I worked so much with the gay community, I would often recommend going to the Wednesday night volleyball as a way where people who were just coming out could connect.
Indeed, the 1970s were an important time in our Santa Cruz County LGBTQ plus history. And with the help of our guests, it has been fun reflecting back about what the 1970s were like.
Thank you, Rob, for that pre-recorded information. Welcome back. I'm Cece Pinero. I'm your host here at Pride Perspectives Radio Show. Welcome back. Our show today is focusing on the Santa Cruz Dyke March and reflecting on our Pride Perspective shows this year. Our guest today is Mariposa Bernstein, who was involved in the first Santa Cruz Dyke March. Well, welcome back, Mariposa. And we didn't get to hear your coming out story. Can you just tell your coming out story really quick?
Well, I was in Boston, and I went to UMass Boston, and I actually had a boyfriend, Rick, who I'm still connected with. We talk on Zoom every once in a while. And I had a very good friend, Sue, and I guess Sue had a little crush on me, but she was like, oh, you're just, hopelessly heterosexual. And I'm like, well, I don't know about that, but anyhow, time went on, and Rick and I broke up, and she invited me to a party, and her ex-girlfriend was there, and she was Sue was kind of like ragging on me, and her ex-girlfriend, God, I can't believe I'm forgetting her name. This is terrible. Great coming out story, and I can't even remember the name. anyhow,
one of those women.
Yeah, this woman, and she was like, "Why is she so hard on you?" And I said, "I don't know." I told her I had a crush on her, but she just called me hopelessly heterosexual. And she said, "Well, are you?" And I said, "No." I just said, I'm kind of nervous, like I want to make sure I do it right. And what if I don't like it? Or I just had some very practical questions. So she's like, "Well, I got to go back to the bus. Do you want to walk with me?" And so we're in Cambridge, and I said, "Yeah, you want to go get coffee or something?" And it was a little Greek place, and we started talking. And she said, "Well, have you ever thought of asking me out?" And I said, "No, but do you want to?" And she said, "Well, I'm not really looking for a relationship, but I would love to bring you out because I think you'll be a good lesbian in the community." And she came back to my house in Cambridge, and we smoked a little, and we spent the night together one night. And she was joking. She said, "Are you sure you've never done this before?" And I said, "Well, I guess it's like a duck to water or something, I said, and then I marched in the parade with her later that summer and never saw her again. And this is terrible. I can't even remember her name. And stayed friends with Sue off and on, and finally, told her that I'm definitely a lesbian. And one of my wife's co-workers said I was a professional lesbian. I said, "Well, I don't get paid for it, but..." So that's kind of funny.
Duck to water. Well, and there are many nameless famous people out there, and certainly our hats go out to this nameless person that brought Mariposa out, brought the duck to water. And when we're done with this show, I'm sure that you'll remember her name.
Yes.
It'll come to you, right?
Right.
But that is a great story.
Yeah,
and
that
then,
was fun.
sort of getting back a little bit to the Dyke March and Santa Cruz, and can you, put your thinking cap on and what do you most remember from the early years in Santa Cruz County? And what year was it?
The Dyke March?
Yeah, well, in terms of you as an out lesbian and...
Well, I remember totally embarrassing John Laird, and he's talked about it at some of his fundraising things, that because as a feminist, I was also voting for the Equal Rights Amendment. And one of the things we said was we should be able to go topless if men can go topless.
I remember.
So we had a protest, and John was, marching, and he saw me, and he's like, "Don't come close, because that would be a really bad optic if they saw him hugging a, topless woman." So he teases me about that all the time. Huh? What?
Really, he's just afraid of breasts.
Probably. But we joke about that every once in a while. So I remember those activism days of doing that, and actually working at a coffee shop that was down by the town clock, and we sold Nicaraguan coffee because it was the time when people and Starhawk and Rabbi Paula, who her and Starhawk went down and picked coffee. There was a whole bunch of connections with the Sandinistas, who were young and radical, and sadly it didn't continue to run the country. But we only sold Nicaraguan coffee. Darrell Darling was the owner. He just passed recently, and we had on the topless March Day. I served coffee topless, which, now I know is not necessarily a very safe thing, but it was very fun to do that day.
And just to backtrack a little bit, so what was John Laird's role at that time for the listeners that don't know him? And was he the mayor of Santa Cruz at that point?
Yes.
Was he?
He was one of the first openly gay mayors in the whole country, and he's now our state senator, and a wonderful person, a very strong advocate for our community. And if you're not interested in LGBTQ things, he's done a lot of work to save our shores, and that's something that we really need to take action on these days, because they're talking about trying to drill oil off the coast, and we all know how terrible that is. So stay tuned for all that activism, because many of us who took the step to come out of the closet as gay or queer or whatever identity also realized that once you open that door to check out the world, you know, hopefully you see that other people are oppressed and that we, you know, as we were saying, nobody's free till we're all free.
Absolutely.
And we have to use different tactics to get around the world these days.
Thank you so much. We just have a minute here, and we hope all of you and families and chosen families have a safe and inclusive holiday season.
Absolutely.
We'll be back here on Sunday, December 28th, finishing out our reflection of the year. We'll focus on many queer artists and musicians, and you'll get to hear the world premiere of the 50th anniversary composition called Here to There, Then to Now, that was performed for the first time in May of 2025. We will have a guest host, Kim Clark, and guest speaker, Rev D. Thanks again for listening. Pride Perspectives, conversations and stories to celebrate LGBTQ plus history across Santa Cruz and Monterey counties. And I have a brief quote before we close out here. A traditional and very fitting passage to reflect on the first night of Hanukkah comes from the prophet Zechariah 4:6, which is often associated with the holiday's deeper meaning. Not by might nor by power, but by my spirit, says the Lord of hosts. This verse speaks to the heart of Hanukkah, the idea that endurance, faith, and spiritual light can prevail even when resources seem small. Thank you for listening.
River.